There's an island at the top of the world that most people couldn't find on a map. That holds enough fresh water to raise global sea levels by 7 meters if it ever melted. That sits at the crossroads between three oceans. That contains minerals the entire modern world desperately needs. This island has a population smaller than a mid-sized regional town, 57,000 people. And yet, world leaders are panicking about it. Warships are repositioning, tariffs are being threatened, and a centuries-old question about who owns this frozen giant is suddenly, uncomfortably, very much alive. Welcome to World Unwrapped. Today, we're peeling back the layers on Greenland. Let's start with the basics, because Greenland's geography is genuinely, almost absurdly remarkable. Greenland is the world's largest island. It stretches over 2.1 million square kilometers, roughly the size of Western Europe, more than 3 times the size of Texas. And yet 80% of it is covered in ice. The Greenland ice sheet is the second largest ice mass on Earth after Antarctica. At its thickest point, it is over 3 kilometers deep, solid ice. If it all melted, sea levels globally would rise by 7.4 meters, enough to put most coastal cities meaningfully underwater. But here's where it gets stranger. The sheer weight of that ice has pushed Greenland's bedrock below sea level. Remove the ice tomorrow. Parts of the interior flood. What we call one island might actually split into 3 separate landmasses. Greenland is, in a sense, 3 islands wearing one very large icy coat, and hidden beneath all of that ice, scientists have found a canyon that rivals the Grand Canyon in depth and dwarfs it in length. Nearly 750 kilometers long, a buried geological scar, invisible from above, sealed in frozen time. They've also found what appears to be a meteor impact crater under the ice, a geological crime scene that may have triggered an ancient ice age. Now, here is something most people miss about Greenland. Where it sits. Geographically, it belongs to North America. Its nearest neighbor is Canada's Ellesmere Island, just 26 kilometers away. And yet, politically and culturally, it has been tied to Europe, to Denmark, for centuries. That gap, between where Greenland is and where it belongs, is at the heart of everything happening right now. Greenland straddles the Arctic and North Atlantic. As the ice retreats, new shipping routes are opening. Routes that could cut Asia to Europe travel time by almost a third. Greenland sits right along those corridors. And the northernmost military installation in the world? Pituffik Space Base, formerly Thule Air Force Base, sitting just 930 kilometers from the North Pole. Home to the U.S. Space Force. This is not a forgotten island. This is a command post at the top of the world. To understand Greenland's politics, you have to go back, way back. The first humans arrived around 2,500 BCE, migrants crossing from North America when Arctic straits froze solid. Different waves of indigenous peoples came and went over millennia, each eventually disappearing, replaced by the next. Then came the Norse. Around 985 AD, a Norwegian Viking named Eric the Red was exiled from Iceland for manslaughter. Sailing west, he discovered this vast frozen island and called it Greenland. Some of it was green, particularly the southern fjords, but historians suspect the name was also marketing, a pitch to lure settlers to the edge of the known world. It worked. Norse communities took hold in the south, farming, trading walrus ivory, holding on. Through the Kalmar Union, Greenland became formally part of the Danish realm. But then, the settlements vanished. By around 1450, the Norse were gone. A cooling climate, collapsing trade, growing conflict with the Inuit moving south. The last recorded document from Norse Greenland is a wedding at Valsey Church in 1408. After that, silence. For centuries, Greenland was left to the Inuit, but Denmark never let go of its claim. In 1721, a Norwegian-Danish priest named Hans Egede sailed to Greenland to save the souls of the Norse settlers, worried they'd miss the Protestant Reformation. When he arrived, there were no Norse, just the Inuit, who'd been there all along, so he stayed anyway and converted them instead. That moment marked the start of formal colonization. Denmark established trade monopolies and missions. In 1953, under pressure to decolonize, Greenland was made a full Danish county. In 1979, growing Greenlandic resentment produced Home Rule, its own parliament, its own government, but still formally part of Denmark. And in 2009, a landmark Self-Government Act gave Greenland something remarkable: the legal right to declare independence whenever its people choose. The path was laid. The timing still undecided. So why does the world suddenly care so much about this remote, icy island? Two words: what's underneath? Greenland holds an extraordinary concentration of the minerals that power the 21st century economy. Rare earth elements used in electric vehicle batteries, smartphones, wind turbines, military hardware. Greenland holds 25 of the 34 minerals the European Commission classifies as strategically critical: zinc, gold, uranium, iron ore, and the rare earths that sit at the heart of both the clean energy transition and modern defense technology. For most of the 20th century, the economics of extracting them didn't work. Too remote, too frozen, too expensive. But the climate is changing, the ice is retreating, and the world has woken up to the danger of depending too heavily on any single country for critical minerals, specifically China, which dominates rare earth processing globally. Suddenly, Greenland doesn't look uneconomical. It looks like a vault, one that several world powers would very much like the key to. Here's what gets lost in the geopolitical noise. What do Greenlanders actually want? Around 84% support independence from Denmark. This isn't a fringe position, it's the mainstream, held across virtually every political party. But roughly 45% of those same people say they don't want independence if it means a significant drop in living standards. Because Greenland receives around 600 million US dollars a year in Danish subsidies, funding healthcare, education, welfare, the foundations of everyday life. Independence requires self-sufficiency, and right now, Greenland isn't there yet. In 2023, Greenland unveiled a draft constitution calling for a Greenlandic republic. In early 2025, parliamentary elections saw the center-right Democratic Party, which favors a gradual path, come out on top. The message from Greenlanders: yes to independence, but on our terms, on our timeline. And then Donald Trump walked in and shook the table. Trump's interest isn't new. He floated buying Greenland in 2019 and was laughed off. But in January 2025, he returned to the White House and returned to the idea. This time with far more aggression. He threatened tariffs on Denmark, sent Vice President Vance to the U.S. military base on the island, appointed a special envoy, and said explicitly that acquiring Greenland was essential to U.S. national security. That military force could not be ruled out. The response was swift. Greenland's prime minister: Greenland is for the Greenlandic people. Protesters in Nuuk held signs reading, "We are not for sale." 6 European leaders issued a joint statement that Greenland belongs to its people. Denmark's prime minister warned that U.S. military action would effectively end NATO. But here's the thing. Trump's instinct, however clumsily expressed, isn't without logic. The Arctic is becoming one of the most contested regions on Earth. Russia has dramatically expanded its Arctic military presence. China, which has no Arctic coastline, has declared itself a near-Arctic state and sought influence in Greenland through mining proposals. The U.S. currently has around 150 military personnel on the island. At the Cold War peak, it was 10,000. The GIUK gap, Greenland, Iceland, United Kingdom, is the choke point through which Russian submarines moving from the Arctic into the North Atlantic must pass. Whoever influences Greenland has enormous strategic visibility over that gap. By early 2026, tensions had partially cooled. Trump stepped back from the most aggressive threats at Davos, but the underlying pressure hasn't gone away. Most analysts expect the U.S. to push for expanded economic and military access, even if formal sovereignty stays with Denmark or an independent Greenland. The flag may not change, but the arrangement almost certainly will. Before we close, two things that stuck with me, because this is World Unwrapped after all. First, the names are backwards. Eric the Red called this frozen island Greenland, and he called the other one, the one with more actual habitable Greenland, Iceland. Historians believe it was deliberate marketing to attract settlers, which means one of history's greatest real estate cons has been embedded into our maps for over 1,000 years. Second, there is a lost nuclear bomb under Greenland's ice. In January 1968, a U.S. Air Force B-52 carrying 4 nuclear weapons crashed near Thule Air Base after a cabin fire. 3 weapons were eventually recovered. The 4th has never been found. It remains somewhere beneath the Greenland ice sheet. To this day, Greenland is easy to overlook. Remote, cold, almost no people, but it contains so much of what the 21st century is going to be shaped by. Fresh water, critical minerals, Arctic geography, emerging shipping routes, and a front-row seat to one of the most consequential military questions of our era. Who controls the top of the world? And at the center of all of it, 57,000 people who simply want to decide their own future. Not to be Danish, not to be American. Greenlandic. The world is waking up to Greenland. The question is, when it does, will it remember that the island already has a people? People whose history on this island stretches back thousands of years before any of the powers now arguing over it existed at all. That is the layer that matters most. Thanks for watching World Unwrapped. If you enjoyed this one, hit subscribe and let me know in the comments. Do you think Greenland will be independent within our lifetime? Until next time, keep peeling the layers.